Welcome, everybody, and good morning. My name is Howard Chao. Welcome to the 8th Annual Ag and Food Tech Workshop. This year, again, unfortunately not at Bonnie Doon, but hopefully we'll be back there soon. Um, as many of you know, I'm a reformed corporate lawyer turned startup investor, and we are with a company called Doon Insights that puts these workshops on. The concept behind our workshops is that we showcase the coolest next generation of ag and food tech startups as a window into what's happening in this sector of the tech world. And we also at the same time put up some great discussion panels by leading investors and corporates to discuss current topics of interest. I started these workshops about 8 years ago when I left law practice as a way to connect with the community, learn, and keep my education current, as well as find investment opportunities for myself. So I personally built up a good portfolio of investments in the ag and food tech sector. Um, I started these workshops with my old friend and client, Eric Wedepohl, who will be speaking a little bit later today at the beginning of the afternoon. And about 6 months ago, I decided to develop and grow these workshops beyond my personal hobby, which they were, because of the opportunity that frankly COVID gave us to do things online. So I invited my old friend Nick Shremick, who's online with me, to join me in putting these on. He comes from a background in the investment and the events world, so he was really a perfect fit to partner with. So that's kind of the quick background on us. It feels only like yesterday that we did our last event on ag and food tech. That was actually in October. And you may ask, well, why did we not wait for another year, which we normally do, to put on the next event? And the reason is simply because there's just so much happening in the sector. As all of you know, this is probably one of the hottest sectors in tech. It is definitely one of the hottest sectors in tech. And so we felt that we could not wait. There's just too much going on. It's accelerating the pace of change. And that's reflected by the fact that today we have 20 really cool startups and 8 discussion panels that are really timely with great investors and great speakers on those panels. There are many words that I suppose we could use to describe the program today. I would include tremendous, riveting, rich, enlightening, to be all modest here, and filled with opportunities for learning and investing. It's going to be long, but it's going to have lots of content. So, I'll hand it to you. If you can stay for the whole day, you'll have a lot more stamina than most people. And Nick and I, of course, will be with you the whole day. We interviewed, I don't know, Nick, maybe 60 startups this year to come up with these 20, and it was hard to limit it to 20 because there were so many good candidates, and we had to turn away quite a few good ones. But I'm sure that you'll agree that we have some great startups and discussion panels this year. Let me just sketch out a few of the themes that you'll be hearing from the program today. First of all, as you can imagine, everybody's trying to figure out what the new post-COVID normal will be. That's going to be reflected in one of the panels on the prepared food and restaurant business, as well as quite a few of the startups. This is also the year of alt protein, cellular production, and fermentation. I mean, we've seen these kind of startups in the past, but this year we just had a flood of those kinds of companies, and you'll see them today. A lot of really great and interesting companies, as well as companies that support them on the infrastructure side. So kind of the picks and shovels strategy for this sector. A lot of focus this year, as you can imagine, on the food supply chain for a lot of reasons, obvious and less obvious. I mean, COVID has certainly focused our mind on the supply chain. Food safety and health issues are paramount, of course. Trying to improve the efficiency of the supply chain and reduce food waste. And then, of course, there are the geopolitical considerations that now enter into food and ag tech, which you never would have thought several years ago were really a factor, but very much are so now. Climate change, of course, drives a lot of decision making now, including especially ag and food tech. I got to say that there's probably the theme that really strikes home for everybody in tech these days is how much everybody's thinking about climate change. And then finally, in this event, which probably more than most other events that you go to, we are going to talk a lot about Asia. And this partly my background. As you know, I spent a lot of time over my career in Asia, but for good reason as well, because Asia is, as we all know now, the world's largest market and the fastest growing market. And we will be hearing from a panel both on China at the end of the day, as well as on India and Southeast Asia. Really good speakers, really good experts that that we'll be hearing from. So those are the themes that you'll be seeing come out of the program today. And I'm not going to say more on that. You'll see it for yourselves. I just want to introduce Eric to the crowd. So Eric Wedepohl is my old friend and former client at General Mills. He was the deputy general counsel there for many, many years. Also worked in a couple other big CPGs over the course of his storied long career. He and I were the ones that first set up this workshop over, I guess, 8 years ago. So it's been a long time. And he's been working with us ever since, putting these events together and helping us recruit speakers and startups. And so welcome, Eric, back.
Thank you, Art.
And I thought we would just take this opportunity in the intro to the second half to just reminisce a little bit about the background and history of this event and also talk about the future. So Eric, you may want to just recount to the audience a little bit about what things were like 8 years ago in ag and food tech, which seems like a generation ago, but it was only 8 years ago. But I guess people would say today that 8 years ago, getting into ag and food tech was actually quite early. So I'm kind of proud of that. But anyway, Eric, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that struck me as I was looking at my notes from our first two sessions over the weekend, and seeing what were the topics we were talking about on the panel discussions and what kind of companies we had. I just really couldn't help but note that really a lot of the innovation that we had at that time was really founded on the pillars of innovation that had been around for 50 years, that were based on taste and food safety and convenience, and frankly lowering the cost of food. And that was on you can imagine that hamburger helper was considered food innovation at one point, when we were kids. But I mean, it was still the beginning of what I would say is healthier, better for you innovation, because a lot of what we were starting to talk about then were reduction in sugar and sodium, and cleaning up labels, getting rid of the chemical-based ingredients that were based on names, flavorings and preservatives and colorants with names that nobody could pronounce, and a move towards simpler ingredients. And you remember one of the discussion topics that we had over and over was around organics and GMO and natural, and the impact that each of those drivers had. And I was just thinking also, how many discussions started with presenters started with, how are we going to feed the new emerging middle class more protein, the 4 billion middle class more protein. And even then, we were beginning to talk about sustainability, but then at that time, really sustainability was around, particularly around food. I mean, certainly in agriculture, it was soil health. A lot of it was, but also in soil and in food was around water preservation and using lower energy, which we know now is expanded, and what encompasses sustainability has expanded just massively since then. In our early startups were just the beginning of the plant-based and alternative protein companies, like the Clara Foods and the Perfect Days and the Memphis Meat. So these were just prototypes that came to our.
I don't know if you noticed, Memphis Meat rebranded themselves to Upside Meats now.
Well, that's right, right.
last week. Yeah.
Exactly. But these were just really new concepts. It's hard to think of, plant-based protein or dairy as kind of like, oh, now that's really new innovation. But that's what it was like 8 years ago. And of course, today it's very different.
Well, let's talk about today a little bit. So how do you feel about the evolution today?
Well, I think one of the things about today, I mean, we don't have to spend too much time on today because I mean we're here. But I mean, one of the things that strikes me is, of course, a lot of these new companies and new concepts were on health continues to evolve, and they're commercialized. A lot of these innovation that we were talking about earlier. But one of the things that I see is that there's been an explosion, multifold explosion in the innovation, and particularly in synthetic biology. I mean, I just was recalling that we had our first few workshops. We found 10 companies. This time, just 6 months after we had our last workshop, where we had 12 companies, I think, we really struggled this time to limit it to 20. So it just shows the level of depth and science and innovation, which I think is much deeper it is today than it certainly was then.
So why don't you make a bold prediction about what it's going to be like 8 years from now, Eric?
Well, I think we're going to see, it'll be interesting on this discussion this afternoon. I think it'll be really interesting to see that I think there's going to be a lot more about food as medicine. I think we're going to see a lot more customized and individualized food for people's health, in particular health situation, but their gut biome. That I think that we will see a number of more of these companies that are helping build the tools to help startups develop. For example, like the fermentation companies or companies that give you the tools to measure sustainability, define sustainability, and give you the metrics for sustainability. And I think it'll be interesting to see that a number of these new proteins and ingredients that will, to improve health and to improve their dietary health, I think it will really be interesting to see the extent to which, one, they can scale, that the cost will be right, and that in fact there'll be measurable efficacy. I think that's going to be the challenges, but I think we'll see much more about that. But I think the big question is going to be around consumers and the extent to which, with all this with all this innovation, the extent to which mainstream consumers are really going to engage and adopt this and feel comfortable with all of this innovation. I mean, after all, food is about the most personal thing you can have. I mean, you ingest food. And I think that, one of the learnings that I think we learned from GMO, just because it sounds logical and it's good, or it appears to be good and on its face, can run into real resistance. And I think there's going to be a lot of vested interests out there to try to resist the engagement with mainstream consumers. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think that we'll have discussions around how do you engage with consumers, mainstream consumers, in a transparent way and educate them about what you're doing.
The other trend that I see happening every year more and more, and which is reflected in a lot of the startups today and last time, is that more and more we're seeing platform startups that produce more than one thing. They produce a whole series or a portfolio of new products using a platform technology. I love that trend. Hope that many of them are successful because they can build much bigger companies this way. So it's another really cool thing that's happening in this sector, which
I think we'll have a lot more about globalization. These companies will be a lot more global, and I think that there will be discussions and presentations around much broader acceptance.